Hey, nature photographers, it's Lee Hoy. I'm looking forward to sharing with you a new series where I'm going to do videos occasionally called How Did I Get the Shot? I feel like it'll be very beneficial in walking you through the entire process from conception to post processing and helping you understand some of the things that go through my mind when I'm out photographing. This series is going to be dedicated to both wildlife, landscape, macro, night sky photography. And I'll take one of my images and I will walk you through how I put the image together. And for me, one of the key aspects of my photography is a formula in my mind that is preparation plus skill times patience equals luck. That formula is preparation plus skill times patience equals luck. And I break those out into various elements. And so I'm going to take those elements and I will apply them to these images and tell you how I got the shot. I think it's going to be super helpful. I think you'll learn a lot from watching them. I'm going to talk about very detailed camera settings, including menu items that you may not regularly hear about. I'm going to talk about autofocus settings. I'm going to talk about creative elements. I'll talk about preparation, things I knew before I ever got there to take the shot, and then ultimately post-processing. So let's get ready. Hey, nature photographers, I'm Lee Hoy, OM System Ambassador, photography workshop instructor for Wildside Nature Tours and Precision Camera and Video, and contributing author for the Journal of Wildlife Photography. Here we go. So here's the image. It's a lovely image of a female mallard with her bill open along a snowy riverbank in Yellowstone National Park, captured during one of my recent 2024 workshops. I like this image. I like the subtlety of it. I like the colors. I like the snowfall. I like the bird's beak being open. There's a lot of elements in this image that I really like. So I wanted to share with you all the different elements that go into this image. So let's start with the first part of my equation, preparation. Now, this particular spot in Yellowstone, if you get there early in the morning, and you can only get there by snow coach in winter, if you get there before snowmobilers and a lot of other snow coaches, you will often find waterfowl in this stretch. Now, the key is getting there early before a lot of other folks have had a chance to flush or push these waterfowl out. Or if you get there when most others have already moved on and you're patient, waterfowl will often come back in. This particular female mallard had actually come around the corner. She was just working her way upriver, and she got to this real shallow area where she decided to feed. So for me, I know this riverbank well because it's a spot we often photograph American dippers. And I prefer photographing most things at eye level as much as possible, and of course taking safety into account. So part of my preparation is, I already know this site. I've been photographing here for many years, and this is one of my favorite spots along the Firehole River for capturing waterfowl. You know, there's often waterfowl in other areas, but I don't like shooting down all that much. This bank allows you to get down low. If you lay down, you'll be able to get eye level at the riffles where the American dippers feed. At this particular point, there were no dippers in the river, but I did see this mallard working up, and I knew if I got down low early enough and waited patiently, that she would just continue to work her way upstream. So having good knowledge of the location, knowing that shooting at eye level versus shooting down on a subject often produces better images, allowed me to know the position I needed to be in. Now, when we're working with waterfowl, focal length is always very beneficial. So the equipment that I used for this particular image, which also goes into preparation, was the OM1 with the M.Zuiko 150 to 400 f4.5 TC 1.25, that built-in 1.25 teleconverter, and its image stabilization pro lens. Okay, so that's a lot of words to say the best lens I've ever owned. The 150 to 400 is outstanding for wildlife photography because you have great focal range. It's a fast lens, given that you can basically shoot at a 35 millimeter equivalent of 1000 millimeters at f5.6. And all you haters want to hate and say, oh, 1000 millimeters, it's still the equivalent. Nobody ever busts the chops of a Canon, Nikon, or Sony shooter when they are using a crop mode camera and tell you the 35 millimeter equivalent. So don't bust the chops of those of us that shoot micro four thirds and just get longer reach. I understand why you're hating. You spend a lot more money for your lenses for shorter lenses. So Believe me, I have so many clients say, I can't shoot that, and I'm getting great shots at 1,000 millimeter. It can be frustrating. I understand that. So I love that lens because of the autofocus capabilities and because of the quality of the images that you get out of it. So the OM1 with the 150 to 400 on there, okay? And then what we're going to be looking at is, let's talk about some of the settings that went into taking this image, okay? I'm going to show you the image again just so you get a refresher look at it. I shot it at 1/2500th of a second, 5.6 at ISO 5000. Now, it was a fairly overcast, snowy day, and in this particular case, the snow was light, but the overcast was quite heavy. I find that most people, I would say 90% of my clients, if their images aren't sharp, it's because they're not using a fast enough shutter speed as a result of using too low an ISO because they're afraid of noise. This is a theme you're going to hear from me over and over and over again. Remember, noise isn't the problem. You can resolve noise when you learn how to post-process correctly, expose to the right, start with a sharp shot, and don't crop the ever-loving crap out of your image, okay? ISO is not the problem. You may be the problem. Your post-processing technique may be the problem. Underexposing your image and trying to brighten it may be a problem, and cropping the snot out of your image may be a problem, but the ISO is not a problem, okay? So here I'm going to be laying down. So could I have gotten away with a slightly slower shutter speed? Maybe. I could have maybe got down to 1600, but why? My shot is sharp. I know when I apply DxO Pure Raw 3 to this image, it's going to really make it pop. And I know that I can apply other post-processing techniques to bring out even more detail on the mallard, okay? So for me, even though I'm laying down, I'm shooting well stabilized, I don't like pushing too slow a shutter speed. I really wanted to capture this image, and as she worked her way up, sometimes she was closer to the background, sometimes she was further away. I have a long series of images of this particular mallard, but this one is my favorite because of the build position, okay? And so for me, I chose it because of that. I love the way her right foot is starting to come up out of the water, along with the beak position is what really attracted me to this image, okay? It gives you a sense of action, of motion in it. Plus, I love the very small snowflakes in this image. So let's talk about, so those are my exposure settings, right? And let's just take a look. Let's hop over into my Lightroom real quick, and you can see my histogram, okay? Look at that histogram. You'll notice that I expose to the right as far as possible without blowing out any highlights. So if I move into this, okay, and I click the highlight alert, you'll notice there's no blown highlights over there, okay? Take a close look at that. And then you'll notice that I don't have any solid blacks. So the dynamic range of this scene fell easily within the OM1 sensor, all right? So I was able, by exposing the right, to capture as much data as possible in this file. And you can tell that by looking at the duck, by looking at the background. There's quite a bit of detail in the image there, even at ISO 5000. Well, so under preparation, I also like to talk about fieldcraft. By lying down and staying still, I was less likely to flush this mallard. Fieldcraft is a highly underrated and very rarely discussed technique, and fieldcraft has to do with what is it you're doing in the field when you're capturing wildlife, macro, landscape, night sky images. It requires different types of fieldcraft for different types of genres of photography. It requires different understandings of different species and sometimes even different individuals within a species. So fieldcraft is knowing how animals are going to react, how to best approach or get into position to photograph animals. Fieldcraft for many people is simply moving straight at subjects to try to get closer, which very rarely works. I have great examples of photographers in Yellowstone trying to go out and photograph moose in a field, and I could see what they were doing, and I knew that they were going to flush the moose right at my clients. And I told my clients, if we'll be patient, we'll get the best shots because they don't know what they're doing. They had white snow camo, they did everything wrong and got no shots, whereas my clients got some phenomenal shots. The reality is that knowing fieldcraft will often put you in position to capture a much better image. by learning to be patient, which is another part of the formula that we'll talk about. So preparation is, I understand waterfowl, I understand how to get eye level, I know the location allows me to do so, okay? And in this case, fieldcraft allows me to just be patient and know that if we remain still as she works up the bank, she'll get a lot closer to us than if we tried to move towards her. So by simply laying down, remaining still, instead of going at the duck, we allowed the duck to come at us, which resulted in much better images. If you wonder why a lot of your shots are butt shots of animals, it's probably because you don't practice good fieldcraft and you're constantly going at animals, pushing them another way, or an old hunting term is bumping an animal, pushing it away. Okay, so rather than constantly bumping your subjects, allow your subjects to come to you and you'll find your imagery will get much better. So that's preparation in large part, okay? Now let's talk about, so preparation plus skill. Now in this case, there's technical and creative skill. Now the technical side of skill here is not only knowing how to expose my image to the right, but understanding the various settings in my OM1 that will help me capture a great image. I wanted to shoot wide open, to give myself a faster shutter speed. So by shooting at 5.6, which you can see I'm at 500 millimeters, okay? And which is means I have to shoot at 5.6. That's the fastest aperture. If I were at 400 millimeters, you know, I could shoot at 4.5. But in this case, I'm zoomed all the way out. That's by flipping the little lever on the right side of the lens to engage the built-in 1.25 teleconverter. To utilize autofocus, in this case, the bird was far enough away from the background. There's no intruding limbs, branches, other ducks or waterfowl or other subjects in the way. So in this case, I use all autofocus points with CAF plus MF focus. Why would I use continuous autofocus plus manual focus? And I leave that on all the time. Here's why. There are certain circumstances where AI subject detection or autofocus tracking on other systems doesn't work well. Now in this case, the snowflakes were very small, but many times over the last 4 weeks, the snowflakes were very big, so big that it would often draw the attention of your subject detection autofocus points, in which case we need to manually focus. So when I'm in a situation with snow, and again, I leave continuous autofocus plus manual focus on all the time. And the reason I do that is because the beauty of the OM system is we can tweak our focus manually while still having autofocus. I don't have to turn autofocus off. And by having focus peaking turned on, and I use red as my outline color because it stands out the most in images. If the snowflakes in this case were bigger or interfering with focus, I could simply reach forward and manually adjust my focus. In this case, all autofocus points with eye detection frame turned on, okay? I use back button focus. So as this bird foraged, when it looked at me or when the eye was visible, I would engage autofocus. If the bird looked away where it wouldn't be a good shot or turned at an angle that wouldn't be a good shot, I simply let go of the back button focus, and then the OM1 places a white box around the body of the duck, knowing that it's continually tracking that duck with the AI subject detection. So when a bird's head would be at a good angle, I would engage autofocus, hopefully acquire the eye, and then capture images. So autofocus settings are, I don't want, you can't turn center priority on anyways with AI subject detection, but I use all autofocus points. I use CAF plus MF, right? And I have subject detection birds turned on. Now I program my exposure compensation button to be able to turn subject detection on and off, because there are times where I want to disengage it if it's grabbing other objects, other subjects. Now the OM1 Mark II has a button we can press to lock that subject detection on a specific bird. I haven't had a chance to try that yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that in the Amazon. So those are my autofocus settings, okay? And I generally use CAF sensitivity +1. Okay, you can experiment with other settings to find what you like. I also make sure that in my images, in my camera bodies, that I don't have any noise reduction, noise filtering turned on. Y'all have heard me say many times, I'm a control freak, OCD, and a perfectionist. I don't want the camera doing post-processing. I want to take care of that. So we're gonna see that some of these settings that really come into play in capturing your images are going to go a long way. The more you understand how they work, the more you'll understand when to use them. Okay, so how they work, why they work, helps us make the decision of when we should use them. So that's my autofocus. Now let's talk about my drive mode. My drive mode in this case is SH2, and that is up to 50 frames per second. Now you can reduce that. Some of you may say I don't want 50 frames per second, but the whole point being, out of a series of many images, I was able to capture about, I think out of, I don't know, I would say maybe when she got in this position where her head was facing me, I think I got maybe, let me see, I'm looking here, 4 or 5. No, I actually got, oh wow, okay. I actually got like 11 or 12 images with the bill. Oh gosh, there's more. She kept quacking. So I may have had 20 images of the bill open. If you're shooting at 20 frames per second, you're not going to get that many. So at 50, I have a plethora of images to choose from in terms of the bill being open, the leg position. You know, some leg positions, the body is sideways, okay? So you'll see that 50 frames per second gave me a lot more options when it came to choosing an image with a head angle, leg position, background position that I really like. Some people go, well, I just don't have time to look through that many images. Most of my clients are retired, and I find that kind of funny that you don't have time to look through more images. I would rather increase my opportunities at capturing a special moment that might be just a fleeting moment, rather than worrying about how many images I have to go through. With Photo Mechanic, I can cull images very quickly, so having a lot of images doesn't bother me. I would rather have more images to choose from. So again, drive mode is SH2. That's electronic shutter. It'll do up to 50 frames per second, up to ISO 12.8. So if I need an ISO above 12.8, I will then change to silent sequential, which will give me 20 frames per second. So ISO 12,800 and below, I'm generally on SH2 drive mode. ISO 12.8 and above, I'm generally on silent sequential, high sequential, which is 20 frames per second. Those are my two primary drive modes for wildlife. Obviously, we have Pro Capture, which is for very special moments and things like that. Well, knowing the limitations on my drive mode, I also know that the lowest shutter speed on SH2 is 1/640th of a second. Okay? Now, that's not a problem in this case, and realistically, if I'm trying to capture 50 frames per second, I am probably focusing on action that needs a shutter speed greater than 1/640th of a second. That kind of goes without saying. There may be circumstances that I would want 50 frames per second at a slower shutter speed, but I can't really think of it. So it just makes sense that if you're trying to capture a lot of images, it means something fast is generally happening. Well, Lee, what about when you're shooting a perch bird? I just tap the shutter button and I delete extras. I don't worry about it. It's digital. I can delete files. Memory isn't that expensive anymore. Not a problem. I don't bother changing back and forth. I'd prefer to leave it at 50 frames per second and be ready for action than not. You may choose to do otherwise, but I bet you'll miss some shots that I will get. Okay? So, drive mode, shutter speed we talked about. We talked about ISO. We talked about aperture. And at 5.6, I'm close enough where the depth of field, if it grabs the eye, it's as you can see from the image, it's relatively sharp from the tip of the bill back to most of the body. So the depth of field for me is sufficient here. You could go to 6.3, 7.1, but as you do that, more of the background will become in focus. And here the background's out of focus enough for me to give you a little feel for what's going on, and we can do some masking in Lightroom to further blur that background, okay? And so, autofocus settings, drive mode settings, all those kind of things come into play when we're trying to capture. That is the technical skill. Now let's talk about the creative element or the compositional element of this particular image. Now I have a saying that a vertical subject often warrants a vertical composition. However, in this case, because the duck was moving at me relatively close, because I was laying down and I could see that she was starting to quack and I wanted to capture the quacking, I did not want to waste the time rotating to a vertical image. And by keeping this image horizontal, I had more of the bank with the color that I believe is more complementary to the mallard's plumage than more snow. Okay, I probably would like both images, but I think in this instance, I like the complementary colors of the background for me. You may think different, disagree, but that's okay. That's the beauty of art, and I'm not talking about AI crap that gets generated. I'm talking about art you actually capture, okay? In this image, with subject detection, the biggest advantage of subject detection for me is that it allows me to try to compose my images on the fly. I've shared with you in other videos that I rarely ever crop an image. Now, having said that, let me also talk about image aspect ratios. I shoot with a micro four thirds sensor. I prefer the crop of a 3.2 or a full frame sensor, probably because I shot 35 millimeter for much of my life, okay? And so I don't know why, but I find a narrower, longer image a little more visually appealing than a little square image. And I'll be honest, I can't really give you an argument other than the fact that that's what I shot much of my life, and that's probably what I became accustomed to. So I crop all of my 4/3 images to a 3.2, but I'm not generally cropping for composition. I'm cropping, I mean, I guess you could say I am, but in effect, I just like a 3:2 ratio. It's weird. I don't know why. Occasionally I do an odd ratio. I'll even sometimes do a 1:1, like an Instagram ratio, but I just generally prefer a 3:2 aspect. And again, I think it's probably just because of what I looked at for so long. I don't like 8:10 formats. It's really weird to me. I don't like 5:7s. I'm more of a 3:2 ratio kind of guy. Okay. So when I'm trying to compose an image in camera for wildlife or waterfowl or even birds in flight, I'm trying to put them where I want them in the frame. Now this duck was primarily looking at me or slightly to my left, which meant I would prefer to have it on the right third of the image looking into the negative space. So as much as I can, I'm adjusting on the fly. Even, I'm laying down, resting on my elbows, so I only have so much leeway to play with without making too much motion and scaring the duck. Okay, we don't want to flush her. I got clients there photographing her, and I don't ever want to do things that could potentially flush a subject. When you do, you feel horrible as a workshop leader. So there's no worse feeling out there than flushing a subject that your clients are trying to capture. So with the creative elements, visual balance. I'm looking at visual balance. The background is nice and visual balance, you know. Now, when you look at my image here, I'm going to show you the raw file. You'll notice that it's a little, as I like to say, whomper jawed. My horizon isn't perfectly level because of the angle I was shooting at. So when I laid down initially for another subject, I had to turn, and my horizon isn't great. So I'm going to have to fix this horizon a little bit in post-processing. I would much have preferred, I try to pay attention to my level in camera, and I just didn't pick it up on this particular image. So there's one where I'm going to have to make a little bit of an adjustment in post-processing by leveling that horizon, okay? What I hope you're learning about is how much goes into one image, and a lot of this you don't even think about. It's just things I do over time, having developed certain skills. So we have preparation that we've talked about, we have technical skill, which we've talked about, and the creative element, which I've already just now talked about. Now there's the patient side of it, and that patient side of it really comes into play because of the fact that I waited for the duck to approach us, okay? Being patient when we drove by earlier in the morning and there were more people here, didn't bother getting out, came back when no one was here, and got some nice images. This is what patience is all about. I find the majority of clients I take out can really struggle with how patience works when it comes to wildlife photography. So those are the first elements of the formula. Luck, listen, once I heard her start quacking, I knew her bill was going to be opening, and I started firing away. Now, luck is really not luck in the sense that, well, you got lucky. Other photographers were there, and I don't know if they got any of them with her quacking. If they were using slower drive modes, then probably not. And so one thing I'll often listen for is vocalizing birds. That might give you a clue as to whether they're about to take off, fly, whether they're disturbed or for whatever reason. There was actually a drake upstream that I think she was probably calling to. So that's where the luck come into play, getting that bill open, getting a nice head angle, all that comes into play. So having said that, those are the various elements that went into capturing this image. But now let's jump into Lightroom and take a look at how I've chosen to post-process. So here's my raw file of this image, and I want you to take a look up here in the upper right at my Lightroom. Okay, you will see that I have the highlight alerts checked, and now I'll check shadows alert, and you'll notice that I did not blow out any highlights, nor do I have any solid blacks in this image. The dynamic range of this image fit my sensor quite well, and I'm happy to say, when you capture an image like this, it means I've captured as much information as possible for my post-processing. So I've got as good a start as I'm going to have with a file as possible. So in this area, and again on the histogram, we're really worried about the far right and the far left. Did I blow out any highlights, or do I have any pure blacks? The rest of it is just telling me information on the tonal distribution throughout the image. And clearly the fact that there's this peak in the middle tells me that there's a lot of neutral tones in this image, which you can see that to be the case. The peak here at the far right is from all the snow. This big peak here in the middle are all the neutral tones that comprise this image. There's a few dark tones, like obviously down her throat, which even if you look is not pure black based on the histogram. And some dark here on the bill and a little bit in her plumage, some minor dark spots in the background, okay? So that's a look at the histogram and telling you how well I expose the image. Now, to start out processing my image, the first thing I have is you'll see this preset called DxO Pure Raw 3 Import. This is a preset I created so that when I import an image into Lightroom, it removes any default sharpening that is applied by Lightroom. Normally the default is 40, so you can see here I have it set to 0, and it makes sure I shoot in camera muted color profile. It makes sure that stays in camera muted, and it removes any and all processing that Lightroom might do by default. Because I'm going to take this image, being above ISO 1600, I'm going to edit this image as in DxO Pure Raw 3, has pre-sharpening and pre-noise reduction. So we're going to right click on this image and we're going to say export to, process with DxO Pure Raw 3. And we're going to wait for that to start. Now this is a very intensive software program. I have a 2023 almost maxed out MacBook Pro, and even with that MacBook Pro, it can take a little bit for DxO Pure Raw 3. I could probably edit 8-9 images at once in DxO Pure Raw 3, but if you have a slower computer, I highly recommend you simply stick to one image at a time, which is generally what I do as well. So, okay, so we're going to start the processing. Now on DxO Pure Raw 3, they have different processing modules. I choose Deep Prime XD. I have it do optical corrections. I have it do vignetting, chromatic aberration, lens distortion. I want my output file to be a DNG. I want the destination, I want to go back into the original folder, and I rename the file with the processing method that is applied. So I'll get my original file name plus whatever DxO processing method I use. Okay, it will then import it back into into the Lightroom folder that I have. Now it puts it in a collection. That's not my favorite part, but hey, it is what it is. So I'm going to start DxO Pure Raw 3 on the processing. Oh, I've already done this once, so I'm going to use a unique name on that. So it's going to process this file. It's taking it a second to do so. All right, so I've got my DxO file back. You can see here I have this DNG file. Deep Prime XD is the processing. And you can see here, got a nice sharp image. Again, ISO 5000. Okay, did a really nice job on the background noise versus the raw file. Okay, you can see here before DxO Pure Raw 3 has been applied. And to compare them next to each other, I'm going to select them. I'm going to hide my in panels, and we're going to go to compare images. Okay. So the original raw file is on the left, and the DxO file is over here on the right. I'm going to darken the background so you can see them a little better. And let's zoom in. Now look at how smooth, right, the bill, the beak would be. Look at the nice detail here in the feathers. Look at the noise reduction. Look how smooth and creamy that background is, right? Look, particularly here in the dark foreground. So this is why I say, you know, ISO isn't a problem anymore. It's only a problem when you don't know how to post-process correctly. So let's get our end panels back in Lightroom. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do some editing on our DxO. So again, there's our DxO file. This is the one we want to edit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the develop module, and I'm going to crop this to the 4/3, to the 3:2 format, okay? And again, I don't know if my horizon is that unlevel. She's walking up a riffle. So before I'd corrected that, but honestly, if you look at the bank, I think my image is actually pretty level. So I don't know that I'm actually, let's see what would happen if we tweak that a little bit. Yeah, I think I do like that a little better. So again, what I did here in crop, in order to rotate, I just have my cursor outside the image, and you'll see that little arrow. So I can come in here and just make some minor adjustments to the level like that and hit return. And I think I like that. I think that's going to work for me, okay? Now, I shoot in camera muted because I want the JPEG on the back of my camera and the associated histogram to be as close to my raw file as possible. And I'll do a video on that later. So I like to try out Camera Natural first because it tends to be subtle. It gives maybe a little bit of a warm feeling to warm images, a little bit of a cool feeling to cool images. So you might have to watch that. Overall, I think my white balance is pretty good here. My whites look fairly white. I have a default preset that I like to apply for vibrance and saturation. I don't know that I want my typical default on this image. I think it might warm it up a little too much, so I'm going to pull vibrance back down, and I'm going to remove saturation to +5. Saturation does not take much at all. I like to say, kiss it, don't molest it. That's key when it comes to post-processing, right? So I'm actually going to pull saturation down so I don't get too orangey. There's a lot of oranges in this image, and we don't want to lose that feel. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into masking, and I'm going to select the subject. Now the subject I'm going to treat pretty consistently here. What I tend to do on birds is I tend to like to apply some texture. Now let's zoom in on this bird so you can see what texture is doing. Texture works where there's a lot of contrast. So if I slide texture way to the left, you'll see that it kind of blurred the duck, didn't it? If I slide it way to the right, it's way too much, okay? So, but if we just do a little bit, it'll just help bring a little more contrast to the edges of its feathers. The thing about clarity is it pushes your whites and your blacks further apart. See, clarity gives a little bit of a sharpening feeling, but the problem can be that it's going to push your blacks and your whites. So there used to be a day where I used clarity more before texture came along, but you know, I can go crazy with texture, make it look way over sharpened. And when we do the mask, we want to select the subject. Like if I were going to get real picky, I might even subtract. So here I'm going to subtract with a brush so that because we really don't want too much detail in here. I mean, the bills are generally pretty smooth. So I'm just going to remove some of these areas, and let's just check my overlay to see, oh boy, I didn't do a very good job there. So let's go back to my brush and let's remove. It's generally good to turn on the overlay when you're trying to do some kind of detail work like that. And I deleted a section there I shouldn't have, but let's get the smooth part of this bill out of here, okay? To be frank, I would use the subtract object and highlight it, but there is something about Lightroom that if you're trying to record a screen and you select object, it moves it off screen, and it's utterly maddening. So I don't know why that's the case. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to add this. I'm going to add in this plumage, okay? So that'll help keep that bill a little more smooth when we're doing our work. So there you can see, and in fact, usually an eye that big, I'll also subtract. So we're going to subtract a brush. And I'm just going to go over here and I'm just going to subtract out that eye to keep it nice and smooth. Check out my overlay real quick. Did I get it? Yeah, pretty well. Get a little more up there. Okay. Now, I often like to do a duplicate and invert mask, but in this case, I'm going to need to subtract with the brush. I don't want the eye getting the same treatment as the background, and I definitely don't want this bill getting that, so we're going to subtract the bill here. And again, it'd be quicker to do this with subtract subject, but for some reason, when you try to do that recording a screen, it jumps away from you. Reduce my brush size. I'm just sliding up and down on my mouse to reduce my brush size. Okay. So, in recording this video, I'm going to go a little quicker than I might if I were just sitting here by myself. Okay. Let's zoom out a little bit. And there's some sections down here that I want to subtract with a brush where the water was sharp. Okay. We don't want this stretch. We don't want to try to blur what should be in focus, and there's just a little bit of this riffle that was in the focal plane. And again, I'm not going to worry about being 100% tight on this, since for watching purposes you probably don't care to watch all that. Now on the background, what I can do is I'm going to really run up my noise reduction, and you'll see that that'll give a little bit more blur back there. You can also reduce sharpness a little bit, and that might help. Or come up here and run texture back. See that? Texture is going to give me a little more blur. And you might say, well, Lee, why don't you do some, the new feature in Lightroom, which is lens blur, okay? And it's because if I do that, I've already kind of softened my snowflakes a little bit. So what I might want to do, since I did that mask on the background, what I might do, see, this is a tough one. Let's just see what happens if we turn the mask off. See, I'm afraid that by softening that background, I may have lost too much of my, my snowflakes. So that's a creative decision. Do I really want that? And I don't think I do. I think I'm going to actually turn that mask off, leave the background as is, and have my snowflakes show up a little better. So if I use the lens blur, I'm going to run into that same problem of losing my snowflakes, and I feel like those snowflakes are a key part of this image. So what I could do is, if I wanted to, I could come down here and I could mask out and do some work smoothing this a little more. I could really, if I wanted to work with color selections, you know, I could probably get there. But honestly, I like this image as is. I don't always need a perfect blurry bokeh. Having a little bit in focus in this image, I think it correlates well with the mallard's plumage, and it gives you a feel for the riverbank where she'd been feeding. So I think overall I'm pretty happy with where this image ended up. I hope that what you're going to find out is that this process will be very beneficial in teaching you from beginning to end how I capture an image. Hope you enjoyed it. Hop over to the website, check out my OM system only workshops. Several of them are full. I'm trying to get some new ones listed. And you know what? Many of you have been sending some support financially. You just blow me away. I'm so appreciative of that. Thank you. It means a lot. I leave for Peru on Friday, so I'm going to have some videos from there. I'm going to talk about taking what nature gives you. So look forward to that. Y'all have a great week. Get out there, capture some great images. Bye-bye.